Hi, this is E.R. Brooks, and welcome back to Storytime with Brooks. Today we find ourselves in Chapter 5, so without further ado, here is Chapter 5. And as always, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoy the story. Chapter 5, Dancing Around Reality. Evadne, 5 years ago. You will ask for a match, and I will give you a wildfire. I don't know how to love small. Aaron Van Vuren. 3 years passed, and in my mind, Faye became Schrodinger's cat. I didn't know if she was dead or alive within the realm, thus she simultaneously became both. F could give us no answers on her well-being, or even tell us if she was alive, but that didn't stop me from pestering him as soon as he walked in the door. It was always the same answer. You know I can't, he'd murmur as he gave me a hug, his silver eyes heavy with unspoken words. So, she remained a scientific cat, and I held to the tiny spark of hope that whispered she'd come home to us, and then everything would feel okay again. Such hope was the only thing that kept me from crumbling into the deep despair that lingered around the edges of my mind as our family tried to maintain a small sense of normalcy. All I wanted was for my brother and sister to come home so our shattered family could be glued back together. It was all any of us wanted. It was Saturday, which meant I didn't have ballet practice at the studio, so I opted to go weed the flower beds in the warm sunshine before practicing on my own. Glorious sunshine, I called, yanking open the curtains. Horrible sunshine, Ember growled as she burrowed deeper under her covers. Come on, Ember, I'll make you a cup of tea, I called as I hastily pulled on an airy floral skirt and a tank top. You can help me weed the flower beds. Pretentious leaf water, she mumbled as she pulled a pillow over her head, like I'd want to drink plants or uproot them. The memory hit me like a blow to the gut. That was exactly what Faye used to call it. It's Saturday, Ember snarled, pulling me from the memory. That means I get to sleep in. Now close the curtains before I bite you. That would require you to get up because I'm out of reach, I sang as I danced out of grabbing range, pirouetting my way across the floor and toward the door. She hurled the pillow at me, but sleepiness made her aim sloppy, and it missed me by 3 feet. Just you wait until I get my coffee, she threatened darkly. Get up, I sang. No! It's a glorious morning, Em, and I am going to make you enjoy it. She bared her teeth at me and resolutely closed her eyes. Strands of her short, fiery red hair were sticking up at odd angles around her head. I will be outside, I stated, and when you have decided to stop being unreasonable, fat chance, she muttered, interrupting me, you may join me, I finished pointedly. She opened an eye. Don't go outside the wards, she said solemnly. I traced an X across my chest. Across my heart, I replied seriously. She nodded, her eyes drifting close. Be safe, you stupid morning troll, she sighed despondently. I love you too, I snorted. Whatever, she mumbled, already almost asleep. I giggled and left her to her dreams. I had made myself enough of a nuisance for now. I would go assault the downstairs and see who else I could annoy. Being 15 was glorious, and I was full of reckless abandon as I leapt down the stairs, taking them 3 at a time in graceful bounds. I knew full well it was a recipe for disaster, but until I fell on my face in some absolutely undignified manner, I would continue to flirt with this small measure of danger. It made the actual uncertainty we constantly lived with seem smaller as I left my stomach on the steps behind me. Sunlight streamed through the thick, reinforced windows, and the iron bars that were bolted across the outside of the windows cast an intricate shadow pattern across the wood floor. Their flower and ivy design gave an air of ethereal beauty while still protecting us from this new world that had sought to harm us when the sun went down. The kitchen was alive with the sound of cooking, food, and music. Mom was slowly weaving her way around the kitchen, her limp prominent as she moved from the stove to the island and back to the stove. She was cutting vegetables, pausing every few seconds to stir the sausage that crackled and popped in a pan on the stove. Her voice carried across the kitchen as she hummed along to the Mumford and Sons song, Woman, that played over the Bluetooth speaker sitting on top of the fridge. "Morning, Mum," I called cheerily as I made my way toward the kettle. "Morning, love," she said with a soft smile as she dumped a pile of diced potatoes into the crock-pot. "You're awfully cheerful," she said suspiciously, arching an eyebrow. "Were you tormenting your poor sister again?" I made an innocent face, and she looked at the ceiling ruefully. "Heaven help you, child. One of these days she'll get her revenge." I shrugged, unperturbed as I made my way over to Da. Ember's threats were always empty words. Da was at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and scribbling notes into his worn leather journal. Most likely more questions to run by F. In the 3 years since they had taken Faye from us, F had become an unlikely ally and fixture in our lives. In the summer, he showed up between the hours of 2 and 5 in the morning. In the winter, it was 2 and 4 in the afternoon. Sporadic and unpredictable, F took to pacing the study as he drank straight from a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. He sweet-talked from Mum upon his arrival. He was only able to nod or shake his head to Da's constant questions. Anything more, and he warned he would be punished. How, he never said, but by the look on his face, I knew it had to be bad. Ember and I would watch their interactions in rapt silence, usually while eating popcorn, absorbing as much of the information as we could. That was until F inevitably decided he also needed a snack, and asked Ember and me to find him some sort of gummy candy. The man had a sweet tooth that rivaled Ember's. That was when the serious questions started. Often when we returned, F and Da would be glaring at each other, while Mum paced in front of the study window, trying to hide the tears in her eyes. F would always break the anger, turning to us to express delight over whatever we had found, and then giving us some sort of treat or gift in return. Last time, he had given each of us an intricate dagger that glowed a pale silver in the dark. He always asked about our dreams before leaving, specifically asking if we had been having any nightmares, or had felt any dark pulls, or had been unable to wake up. Why, he never told us, but I figured it must have something to do with when the Fae would inevitably return for us. It was the only elephant in the room we all dreaded, yet danced around. To admit we were helpless to stop it was to admit defeat. "Morning, Rosebud," Da called, pulling me from my thoughts as I put the kettle on to boil. I forced myself to smile, pushing back the melancholy, and went over to give him a hug. "Morning, Da," I said, taking in the new gash on his cheek and the sickly-colored bruise spreading around his eye. "What happened?" He's going to lie. "Oh, I wasn't paying attention," he said nonchalantly. "I got into a fight with a tree branch. It tried to knock me off Yarrow." He's definitely lying. Yarrow was the gelding that Da rode, a steady Rocky Mountain horse that could navigate any terrain. He was one of the smartest horses we owned, next to Saya, which was Ember's horse, and Arwen, who was mine. Our horses had both been gifts from Oma on our 14th birthday. She claimed they were magical Fae horses that she had won in some sort of a bet. As to what kind of bet it was, especially one she could win in her declining mental state, I had never dared to ask. But I always suspected F had something to do with it. He often asked how they were doing, though we had never mentioned them to him before. Yarrow was as likely to let Da be run into a tree branch as Ember was to concede that she had lost in a fight. It was possible, but only just barely. "Don't worry, sweetheart," Da said reassuringly. "I'll turn it into firewood for the audacity." I laughed half-heartedly at his poor attempt at making a clever joke. It would have been funny if I hadn't been aware of the fact that he was lying. Mum was his most sure tell. She always went still when he tried to brush away the truth of what had really happened, and she was as unmoving as a statue. He was out looking for Faye yesterday evening, searching for the gate that Oma remembered yesterday afternoon. Mum unfroze and began chopping carrots, worry cutting lines into her forehead. She and Da shared a silent conversation within a glance, and she turned away, shoulders tight. The kettle shrieked, and I excused myself to make a mug of tea, trying to ignore the unspoken words and fear that suddenly hung in the room around us. "What do you plan to do today, Rosebud?" Da asked at last, pushing his notebook aside as he picked up his coffee mug. "I'm planning to weed the flower beds. annoy Ember some more, and then practice for the performance next week. Your flower beds are looking beautiful this year, he commented, ignoring my plans regarding Ember. It's a pity the frost will be coming soon. Faye had the same knack for plants. She was always getting new plants to grow and care for. He paused, lost in thought. Everything but succulents, that is, he chuckled. That's because succulents are from the devil, I muttered weakly. A heavy silence filled the kitchen, and Mum dashed a few tears from her cheek while Da cleared his throat. I stared down at my hands. I miss her, I whispered. I miss her too, he said as he pulled me into a hug. We're going to get her back. How can you possibly get her back? There's no way to get her back. Too much. It's all too much. I don't want to think about it anymore. Shuffling footsteps entered the kitchen, and Ember appeared, scowling as she made a beeline for the coffee pot. Morning, Em, Mom said, limping over to kiss the top of Ember's wild hair. I'm going to throttle Evadne, Ember said by way of greeting as she stirred sugar and oat milk into her coffee. Grumpy trash panda, Mum said affectionately. She growled softly, confirming Mum's statement as she turned and glared at me. I feigned innocence, taking a long sip of my lavender tea. Dad got up to refill his coffee and gave Ember a hug. Poor sleepy trash panda, tortured by the early bird, and a tea drinker at that. We coffee drinkers have to stick together, you know. Ember huffed in agreement, sipping her coffee pensively. Her shoulders began to relax as the caffeine began to kick in. Miss Green Thumb over there is going to get a taste of her own medicine, she threatened darkly, when, at 2 a.m., I'm wide awake and think she should be too. Mom snorted in amusement, and Da patted her head. Poor night owl, he comforted. It took Ember a full cup of coffee before she fully opened her eyes and took in the details of Da's face. What happened to your face? She asked in blunt shock. I thought I'd try a natural tree bark scrub, but something backfired. Ember gave him a blank look, unaware of the earlier lie of getting hit with a tree branch. Yarrow ran me into a tree branch on the way home last night, Da lied smoothly. It's nothing to be worried about. Ember looked unconvinced, but one glance at Mum's tight shoulders, and she wisely let it go. We both knew that it was pointless to push him directly. He never told the truth when he had been injured by the Fae. He was worried about making us more afraid. It went against Oma's strongest conviction that we should know absolutely everything about the realm, no matter how ruthless they were, but Daz still refused. We knew that things were not what they seemed, only because I often utilized my very keen hearing around cracked doorways and thin walls. I could almost hear Oma squawking at him to stop being heroically stupid and tell us the truth so we could learn, as he smoothly changed the subject. What are your plans for today? He asked Ember. I'm not sure yet, Ember replied as she refilled her coffee cup. It's too early to know something like that. You could help me weed the garden, I piped up. She leveled me with a cold stare. I'd rather climb the Eiffel Tower in nothing but my skivvies. Ember hated heights. Such dramatics, I muttered as I finished my tea. She stuck out her tongue, and I failed to resist the urge to return her immature gesture. She smirked as my tongue poked out at her before I made my way to the door. The unusually hot September air greeted me with a false sense of normalcy, and the humidity clung to me like a damp cloth, threatening to suck the life right out of me as I made my way around the house and toward the garden that I had been building for the last 2 summers. Sweat was already gathering on my forehead, and my hair was beginning to stick to the back of my neck. I wish we had a pool. It would be our luck that if we got a pool, some horrible water creature would decide to live in it and try to eat us. Maybe a mermaid or a kelpie, perhaps a talking crocodile that ticks like a clock. My feet knew where to take me as I searched the trees that surrounded our home. Searching. I was always searching, desperate for any sign of Faye or Jack or any difference in the line of trees on the other side of the fence. It was the one thing I wanted most in the world, and the one thing I could never have. Come back home to us. They're not coming home. I hated my memory, how it always reminded me of the most precious things I had lost, how it always rushed to the worst conclusions as it tried to smother my last spark of hope. Faye's face was slowly fading from my memory, blurring around the edges as the days drifted past us. I couldn't remember Jack. Only the sound of his laughter remained burned into my subconscious. Gone, gone, gone. Everything in our life was so messed up beneath this fragile facade of everything's fine. Now Faye was the elephant in the room we couldn't bear to acknowledge, and it ate us up from the inside out. Gardening. I'm out here to weed my garden, not to let the negativity steal what joy remains. The roses were blooming again, their sweet scents heavy in the air as I made my way toward the back edge of the flower beds, humming woman under my breath while I pulled on my gloves. I need to weed around the flower beds and along the paths, then spread some more preen to keep the weeds off so I don't have to do this again. My mental list fell silent, and I stopped short, staring in shock at what had been my carefully ordered flower bed of zinnias and daisies. What the actual crap? I seethed. My good mood vanished completely as I beheld the disarray my flower beds had become. Thick vines with purple flowers and bright red thorns had sprung up overnight and were now choking out my lovingly tended flowers. I took a hesitant step forward, and the sweet smell of roses disappeared, replaced by the thick scent of honey and water rot. Nausea rose in my stomach, and I couldn't shake the sense of horror and wrongness that washed over me as I stared. I didn't plant you, I stated angrily as I knelt and started to pull up the noxious weeds. It's impossible that you're here. It's impossible you grew this much overnight. I was just here. Impossible was no longer a word that fit within our lives, yet I still resented the fact that impossible was not only probable, but a regular occurrence. The ground writhed and shivered, the vines growing right in front of me, taking over faster than I could pull them up. No, 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 I whispered desperately as I yanked and tugged. All the hard work and countless hours, the blood, sweat, and tears I had poured into this little space flashed in front of my eyes. After all that time, it was being destroyed in a matter of moments. Thorns were viciously impaling my hands, tearing through my gloves and breaking off under my skin. It hurt. Oh gosh, it hurt, but I couldn't stop. I had to get them out of my garden before they ruined it. Die, die, die! If Ember was here, she'd suggest a blowtorch. If Faye was here, she'd go get one. If Faye was here, then none of this would be happening in the first place. None of this would be real, and stupid magic wouldn't be invading our lives. My feet slipped, and before I could regain my balance, I fell back with a shriek of frustration. I went still, my fury forgotten as I stared down in shock at the crumpled body of the raven that was partially buried beneath the patch of vines I had just uprooted. Oh no. Oh no, oh no, oh no! It croaked weakly as I began frantically pulling at the remaining vines, trying to get its body free from their grasp. One of its wings was bent at a weird angle, clearly broken, and blood was thickly matted across its feathers. I'm going to help you, I whispered, as I finally freed it from the tangle of thorns. It's going to be okay, I said weakly. It's going to be okay. I'm lying to a bird. Nothing is going to be okay. Not for it. Not for us. We'll never be okay again. I leapt from the flower bed, my battle quickly forgotten, cradling the bird in my hands as I dashed toward the house. Mum! I yelled urgently as I threw open the door. She rushed from the kitchen, her limp shoving her sideways as she hurried toward me. Guilt hit me as I realized the stupidity of yelling for her when it was just a broken bird I cradled in my hands. I was acting as if I had found something to do with Faye or had been hurt myself, but it was only a bird that I was creating such a fuss over. She stopped short when she saw the bird cupped in my hands. Evadne, she began uncertainly. It's hurt, I whispered, determined to carry on with my quest despite my blunder. I can't just leave it. Where's Da? He had to go to town, she replied uneasily. Sweetheart. She carefully examined the bird cradled in my hands. It's badly injured. I don't think you can help it. I have to try, I insisted. She pursed her lips, pulling me into a tight hug. Oh, my sweet girl, why must you take in every lost and wandering creature? I couldn't just leave it, I repeated weakly. Even if it's dying, it shouldn't have to die alone. She nodded, swallowing back a lump in her throat. There's a heating lamp and a box out in the barn. You can start with that and try to clean off some of the blood, but don't open up the wound. We'll see what your father can do when he gets back. I nodded and headed toward the barn, grabbing the box and putting some hay into it before rushing to the sink in the back of the barn. Warm water ran across my trembling hands, and I gently began to wash the raven. It protested weakly, thrashing slightly as I carefully soaked the matted blood and began to gently wipe it away. Something had clawed it from its neck down its side. It's a miracle it didn't die right away. I sang a French lullaby softly as I began to wash around the wound, careful to avoid the broken wing. The raven thrashed violently, catching my wrist in its sharp beak and leaving a long, impossibly deep gash in its wake. The sharp, metallic smell of blood accosted my senses as I tried to restrain the bird. "No!" I cried frantically. "I'm trying to help you! Stop! You're going to hurt yourself more!" "Run!" it screeched. Not real. "Run, child, run!" "Birds don't talk. It's not real. It's not possible. Run!" The raven turned black eyes on me, locking me in its gaze as pain lanced through me. My mind seemed to shatter at the edges as a darkness invaded my mind. Pieces of memories that were not mine rushed in front of my eyes, as clear as if I was watching it on a TV screen. Faye's hand in the dirt. Blood. So much blood. A trickle at the corner of her lips as she mouthed a single word. "Run! Run!" the raven screamed, shattering the foreign memories in my mind. "The darkness comes!" "Help!" I whispered weakly as the bird fell still. There was so much blood around us, in the sink, splattered on the walls. Where is it all coming from? It was flowing down my arm. I couldn't stop my hands from trembling as I hastily tried to clean it up. Not real. Not possible. "Help!" I whispered, unable to find another word in response to what had happened. Not real. Not real. Faye is fine. She's fine. None of this is real. Shadows danced around the corners of my mind, slipping in and out of reality as I struggled to get air into my lungs. Not real. Not real. They weren't going away. None of this was going away. I was bleeding out onto the pale tile floor, and all I could do was hallucinate about monsters and creatures that all stood and stared. They seemed to be holding their breath, watching as I fought for life. "Help me!" I whispered, holding out a trembling hand to the stooped figure in the corner. "Evadne?" Ember's voice called from somewhere in the barn. I gasped, unable to get enough air to yell. What has our life become? The shadows inched closer. I was blacking out. Shadows and darkness, with a fate worse than death. "Evadne?" Ember called out again, closer this time. "Help me!" I coughed weakly. She was running toward me now. I could hear her feet as she got closer and closer. "Eva!" she screamed as she came into view. "What did you do?" she yelled. "What did you do?" What does she mean? "Why would you do this? Why would you do this?" she whimpered as she frantically wrapped a towel around my wrist and pushed it over my head. "Why would you do this? How could you think of leaving me?" "Do what? What did I do? Why didn't you tell me you were struggling?" she sobbed as she slung my other arm around her neck and hastily picked me up. Struggling with what? The pieces were falling into place now. She thought that I had done this to myself. She thought that I had given up. The shadows at the corners of the room were fading, the figures disappearing as she rushed for the door. "Bird," I whispered. "I didn't. The bird. It's gonna be okay," she sobbed, before desperately screaming for Mom. "The bird said to run." "That doesn't mean you run away from me," she cried. "Why didn't you talk to me?" I couldn't find the words for a reply. Everything was fading in and out of focus as I fought to stay conscious. Run, run, run. All I want to do is run until the darkness can't find me, until it can't find any of us. Thank you for listening to this week's chapter, and tune in next week for chapter 6. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and take care. Goodbye.